I suffer with something called psychotic depression, which is where I hear things that aren't there. So I hear voices, and then obviously normal symptoms of depression, although I can cope more with the depression than the psychosis. I was diagnosed when I was around 17 by the CAM system, so Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, after kind of my parents and my family noticing a lot of differences in me, going to them and saying that I was hearing voices and that things were really difficult. So a process of doctors, GPs, and then mental health services. Immediately after was really difficult because I was really quite ill and quite unwell. Once I had diagnosis, it was a bit better because I could be treated. It was hard, it was really hard, and it was hearing that you have psychosis kind of made me feel like people were going to really judge me. I didn't really know much about it. Yeah, it was a difficult one to wrap my head around, but once I knew, I found that I could cope with it and deal with my symptoms, and actually now, quite a few years on, it's just a part of my life. It's often not too bad or too good, but it's just like there in my life, kind of one of the things about me. When I was first diagnosed, I had counselling with a psychiatrist and a therapist and a few teams for about 1.5 years. So I'd go and see them and talk things through kind of regarding the psychosis and the depression with 2 different teams. I was also on antidepressants and then tried antipsychotics, but they're quite violent and quite strong medicine, so didn't really have those for too long. But antidepressants for a long while, and they really helped. And also just learning what triggered my symptoms a lot more. And yeah, it was a lot of help to learn my way through it, kind of like learning to walk as a child. But now, as I've been at university, I've kind of just dealt with it on my own because it's really hard to get adult mental health services around Leicester, and also I just thought it would be kind of a lot easier to deal with it on my own. I have a good doctor at home that I can go to when I really need to. I was only on them very briefly after quite a bad spell, and they're very, very strong, and they really change the way your brain is. And they just I found that they really mess with my reality a little bit. They did kind of lessen the voices that I heard, but not in a way that I was comfortable with. It made me feel like I was being tricked. I found that if I could manage the symptoms on my own and with the help of antidepressants, it was a lot easier. When I started hearing voices when I was quite young, probably 8 or 9, which was mainly due to quite a strong imagination, and they kind of persisted for a while and then dropped off the radar. So they started again when I was around 16, so kind of a stressful time, GCSEs and stuff. I also entered into a relationship which was incredibly unhealthy, that I didn't realise at the time. I think that really triggered a big relapse because I was struggling with the voices telling me awful things about myself, and also a partner who was an ex-partner who was basically saying the same things as the voices. So very difficult to kind of manage the two. I would say that the combination of a not great relationship combined with being quite unwell anyway triggered what I would say kind of the worst time of my life. From about 17 to probably 18, half 19, I was very unwell and still really struggling to manage both voices and a relationship that I didn't really understand. I'm always very hard on myself, and I think that I push myself too far, and that really has a detrimental effect on me because I will just push myself all night working until I'm convinced that I'm awful at what I'm studying or doing. And to kind of think that yourself, and then had the added emphasis of hearing things that aren't there telling you exactly the same thing. You know, both of the parties were very young, 16, 17, 18, and I didn't realise I was really anything wrong for a very long time, but it was a very possessive relationship. My partner used to think that I would be doing things that I wasn't, and this kind of escalated from accusations and screaming arguments to more kind of physical violence at the time, throwing things and things like that. And as well as being very unwell, I was struggling with self-harm, and he just found that disgusting, wouldn't want to see me, wouldn't want anything to do with it. It was a very toxic relationship, and one that kind of affected how I deal with people. When I'm really low, when things are really tough, that's when I hear about 7 voices in my head every day. That's fine, I can deal with that. When I'm really bad, they're very angry and violent, and it's almost like there's a room full of people yelling at you, telling you everything that you hate about yourself and that you despise, but also commenting on the people around you. So my friends, my family, my boyfriend, everyone that I hold dear, stuff that they hate me and that they're lying to me and that they don't need me, and also that bad things are happening to them. So if I haven't called them in a while, or if I haven't heard from them, something's happened to them and they're dead or they're dying or they're unwell. It's like all of your worst nightmares being spoken to you all at once while trying to get on with your day, really. It has a massive impact on my mental health while this is happening, because all it does is just makes me feel absolutely useless. It's draining. It's hard to have to listen to all of that. It's not like a horror film. I can't turn it off. I can't press pause. I can't stop it. There is nothing that I can do apart from basically just let it ride through. I've tried hundreds of techniques to help, but when I'm really low, there is nothing that I can do but ride it out, and it just makes me want to hide or run away, or it's awful, basically. I've really struggled with self-harm throughout when I was a teenager, I guess. When I was kind of suffering with depression and the voices weren't there, it was just an outlet. It was like, oh, okay, I felt quite numb, and it was something that I could do to help with that. Once the voices started again, it was an established habit, and they picked up on that, and it was very much, if you don't self-harm, something bad's going to happen to your family, or if you don't self-harm, something bad's going to happen to your little sister. It really is an addiction and something I really struggle with, and something that not many people around me understand, and I guess that I don't often talk about it. I find it a lot easier to tell people that I hear voices in my head than that I struggle with self-harm. I'm doing really well, but I'm still only 4 months clean from self-harm, so despite the fact that I'm controlling my voices, my self-harm is still an issue, and I always find that it's something I tend to go back to, like a really awful safety blanket. It's definitely an addiction, definitely something I'm working on. The summer I was diagnosed was a really, really tough one. I was self-harming quite a lot and hiding it quite a lot, to the point that a lot of my family don't know how big my self-harm is a problem. And I find that with my moods and with the voices, it can drop quite easily, so I can have an incredibly good time and be laughing with my friends, and then find that the drop from that is so incredibly low that it completely paralyses me. So I was away in the summer when I got diagnosed, just kind of dealing with everything. Went away with for a guide camp, something I love doing. And although the voices were bad, it was a good weekend. Had a really great time. I came home. My family were away, and everything just dropped. I pushed everyone that was around me away. So for anyone that could possibly come to the house, I pushed away, just said I needed to sleep it off. That night, locked myself in my family bathroom and tried to kill myself, because it was just, everything was impossible. It was the lowest point I think I've ever been. I was absolutely desperate. Vividly remember just trying to do anything that could possibly end this all. And I think my logic was that this would stop the voices. I don't know if my logic was that this will end my life, but there just seemed to be nothing I wanted. I didn't want to go back to study. I was convinced I would never go to university. I didn't even want to be alive by the time I went back to school, which was not very far away. Despite having a loving family and friends and a whole group of people that would miss me, I was absolutely convinced at that time that in that bathroom it didn't matter at all. And it was awful and painful and all the other things that a suicide attempt are. And I then contacted someone and talked to them, and they urged me to call a family member who amazingly took me to hospital and patched me up and stayed with me while everyone came to talk to me. And the hospitals after a suicide attempt are not nice places. They're confusing. There's scary. It's not a good place to be. But it was my grandmother. She came with me to hospital. She stayed with me, stayed up with me all night, stayed in my house, because then my parents were coming back and I had to deal with I caused it, but the fallout from that, which was incredibly difficult for everyone. it was an absolute desperate case. I was absolutely desperate I just didn't care anymore. I just didn't want to be around, but at the same time, loved my family so much and was absolutely heartbroken. But all I could think was that this is just worth it in the long run. Save everyone from the pain, I guess. I was struggling. It was hard, and it was just impossible to kind of explain at the time, like, to anyone that asked. You know, I wanted to die. I don't, you know, you could look at my injuries and say, well, maybe you didn't try, whatever, but I was desperate and very scared and in a lot of pain and just very unwell. And it was just probably the worst night of my life. And I wouldn't say that it was also my rock bottom. It wasn't like the furthest I could fall. It was bad and it was far, but it was incredibly hard to kind of, I guess, deal with the fact that I wasn't dead after, you know, waking up the next day and the next few days and knowing that, and having scars on my arms and knowing that I was still alive and now I had to live with not succeeding, basically. I must say my parents were incredibly supportive, but they found it hard. As you would, I guess. It's, you know, I'm their first daughter. I was incredibly unwell and it was difficult. We didn't talk as much as we should have done, which has improved, but we didn't know what to do. I think they blamed themselves a lot, which was, in my opinion, stupid, because they didn't cause this. This isn't genetic. This isn't a trauma that they concocted. It is just how my brain is. It's chemicals. It's brain function. But they found that incredibly hard to kind of work out within themselves. My mental illness is messy. All mental illnesses are messy, and they're not fun, and they're not somewhere where kids should be around, and my little sister was no exception. But my family, especially my immediate family, they tried their hardest. They definitely did, and I am incredibly grateful for them for what they've helped me with. They came with me to whatever they could. They drove me to all my therapist appointments, and they just waited for me to come out the other end and waited for me to come back, which took a while, but eventually I did. I came back to them after a very long time of being a completely different person, so I'm glad they waited, but I can understand how difficult it was for them. I would say that it definitely doesn't define you. Whatever your diagnosis, that's not you. That's just one part of you, and there are definitely more interesting things about you than what is going on in your head. I hear things that aren't there, but there are also way more interesting things about me. I wouldn't let anyone stereotype you. If you have a mental illness, work out what it means to you and how it affects you, and that's your mental illness. It's not what you've been it's not everyone is diagnosed the same, and not everyone suffers from the same symptoms. So yeah, don't let it define you, and let people know what's going on, and just deal with it in your own way. You know, mental illness is not something that you need to let define your life when there is so many other interesting things about you.